The gavel hung suspended in the auctioneer's hand like a sword of judgment, while every eye in the packed arena fixed on the trembling black stallion in the center ring. Blood seeped through hastily applied bandages on the horse's flanks, and his wild eyes rolled white with terror as the handlers struggled to keep him upright. This was no ordinary auction. This was the liquidation of Riverside Equestrian Center, and every damaged, discarded, or dangerous horse was going to the highest bidder. Lot 47, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the hushed crowd. Midnight Storm, 5-year-old thoroughbred stallion. Reserve price starts at $500. A collective murmur rippled through the arena. Everyone knew this horse's story. 3 months ago, Midnight Storm had been the pride of the racing circuit, a $1 million champion with speed that defied gravity. Then came the accident, a horrific collision during the Kentucky Derby trials that left him with a shattered leg, nerve damage, and a psyche so fractured that he'd attacked every person who'd tried to approach him since. 500, called out a voice from the back. Then another, 750. But the real drama began when Crestwood Whitmore III, heir to the Whitmore pharmaceutical fortune, raised his platinum card. 10,000, he announced, his voice carrying the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. Whitmore collected broken things, vintage cars, bankrupt companies, damaged racehorses, not to fix them, but to display them as trophies of his wealth. From the cheap seats in the upper bleachers, a weathered hand slowly rose. 12,000. The entire arena turned to stare at the source of the bid. Bolivar Hutchinson sat among the feed dealers and small-time breeders, his calloused hands folded calmly in his lap. At 62, he looked like what he was, a third-generation farmer who'd spent his life coaxing life from stubborn soil. His worn denim jacket and scuffed boots stood out like a weed in a garden of designer suits and polished leather. 15,000, Whitmore countered, his jaw tightening as he glanced back at the farmer who dared challenge him. 18,000, Bolivar responded, his voice steady as bedrock. The bidding war that followed became the stuff of legend. Whitmore, red-faced and furious, pushed the price higher and higher, unable to comprehend why some dirt-poor farmer would challenge him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the numbers climbed. 25,000, 30,000, 40,000. $50,000, Whitmore finally shouted, his voice cracking with rage. Bolivar stood slowly, his knees creaking from decades of farm work. He looked down at the trembling horse, then back at the millionaire who saw only another trophy to acquire. 60,000. The arena fell silent. Whitmore's face had gone purple. He opened his mouth to bid again, but his accountant grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear. The pharmaceutical heir's eyes narrowed to slits as he realized the farmer had just spent more than many people's annual salary on a horse that every veterinarian in the state had written off as untreatable. Sold to the gentleman in Section K, the auctioneer announced, his gavel falling with finality. As the crowd began to disperse, Bolivar made his way down to the ring where Midnight Storm waited. Still trembling and bleeding, the horse's eyes found his, and for just a moment, the terror seemed to fade into something else, recognition, perhaps, or hope. The trailer ride to Hutchinson Farm took 3 hours, but it felt like an eternity. Midnight Storm thrashed against the walls with such violence that Bolivar had to pull over twice to check that the entire vehicle wouldn't tip over. Each time he opened the trailer door, the horse's screams echoed across the empty highway like the cries of a wounded soul. Easy now, Bolivar murmured, though he knew the horse couldn't hear him over his own panic. We're almost home. Home was 400 acres of rolling pasture in the heart of Kentucky, where the Hutchinson family had raised crops and livestock for 3 generations. The farmhouse, painted white with green shutters, sat on a hill overlooking fields that stretched to the horizon. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful, exactly what a broken horse needed. When they finally arrived, Bolivar's daughter Magnolia was waiting by the barn, her arms crossed and her expression skeptical. At 35, she had her father's stubborn chin and her late mother's piercing blue eyes. She'd been running the farm's day-to-day operations for the past decade, and she understood numbers better than anyone. $60,000, Dad, she said as he climbed down from the truck cab. That's our entire emergency fund. That's the new tractor we needed. That's a horse that deserves a second chance, Bolivar interrupted gently. Your mother always said we're not just farmers, we're healers. We heal the land, we heal the animals, and sometimes we heal ourselves in the process." The trailer had gone quiet, which was somehow more unsettling than the noise. Bolivar approached the back door slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. When he opened it, Midnight Storm was pressed against the far wall, his body trembling with exhaustion and terror. Foam covered his muzzle, and his eyes had gone glassy with shock. "Hello, boy," Bolivar said softly. "Welcome to your new home." The horse's ears flicked forward at the sound of his voice, but he didn't move. Bolivar didn't try to approach or put on a halter. Instead, he simply left the trailer door open and walked away. "You're just going to leave him like that?" Magnolia asked, incredulous. "He'll come out when he's ready," Bolivar replied. "Force won't heal what's broken in him. Only trust will do that." They waited on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Just as the first stars appeared, they heard the tentative sound of hooves on the trailer ramp. Midnight Storm emerged like a ghost, his black coat gleaming in the moonlight. He took 3 steps, then stopped, his head raised high as he surveyed his new domain. The other horses in the far pasture had noticed him too. Old Cornelius, Bolivar's retired plow horse, nickered softly from beyond the fence. Luna, the gentle mare who'd been born on the farm, approached the gate with curious ears. Even Jasper, the ancient pony who'd taught 3 generations of Hutchinson children to ride, ambled over to investigate. But Midnight Storm wasn't ready for company. He bolted toward the nearest fence line, his damaged leg causing him to stumble. The watching horses scattered, spooked by his panic. The stallion ran until he reached the corner of the pasture, where he pressed himself against the wooden rails like a wild animal trapped in a cage. "He's going to hurt himself," Magnolia whispered. "Maybe," Bolivar admitted, "but he's going to hurt himself a lot worse if we try to catch him tonight." Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone find their own way to trust. As they watched, Midnight Storm began to pace along the fence line, his hooves wearing a path in the soft earth. He moved like a creature haunted by demons only he could see, and Bolivar felt his heart break a little more with each desperate step. This wasn't just a horse with a broken leg, this was a soul that had been shattered by trauma, fear, and the betrayal of trust. The challenge ahead of them was bigger than he'd imagined. But Bolivar Hutchinson had never backed down from a challenge in his life. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. For the first 2 weeks, Midnight Storm didn't let anyone within 50 feet of him. He'd carved out a territory in the northeast corner of the pasture, where he could see all approaches and had to fence lines to protect his back. His injured leg had begun to heal, but the mental wounds ran deeper than anyone had realized. Bolivar established a routine that never varied. Every morning at dawn, he'd walk to the middle of the pasture and sit on an old tree stump, reading the newspaper aloud while sipping coffee from a thermos. He'd talk about the weather, the crops, the other animals on the farm, and sometimes he'd just sit in comfortable silence. Midnight Storm would watch from his corner, ears forward, clearly listening but never approaching. "The corn's looking good this year," Bolivar would say, his voice carrying across the morning mist. "Your friend Cornelius helped me plant it back in spring. He's got arthritis now, but he still knows how to pull a plow better than any machine." The horse's ears would twitch at the sound of his voice, but he remained frozen in place, as if moving closer would break some invisible barrier that protected him from further harm. Magnolia thought her father had lost his mind. "Dad, you're talking to a horse that won't even look at you." Meanwhile, the Murphy farm down the road is up for sale because they couldn't make their payments. That $60,000 could have bought us another 100 acres. "Money can't buy everything, Maggie," Bolivar replied, using her childhood nickname. "Some things are worth more than their price tag." The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in late September. Bolivar was reading about the World Series when he heard something that made him freeze, the soft whisper of hooves on grass. He didn't look up from his newspaper, but he could feel Midnight Storm's presence like a physical weight in the air. 20 feet away, the horse had stopped, his neck stretched forward as if he were trying to bridge an impossible gap. His nostrils flared as he scented the air, and his whole body trembled with the effort of overcoming his fear. "The Yankees are having a good season," Bolivar said conversationally. as if having a terrified horse creep up on him was the most natural thing in the world. Though I've always been partial to the Cardinals myself. Your mother was from St. Louis, he added, speaking directly to the horse for the first time. She would have loved to see you run. The horse took another step forward, then another. His injured leg was still stiff, but the limp was less pronounced now. Good food, fresh water, and the absence of stress had begun to work their healing magic. I lost her 5 years ago, Bolivar continued, his voice soft with memory. Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, but sometimes the body just gives up before the spirit's ready to go. You know about that, don't you, boy? You know what it's like when everything hurts and you can't trust anyone to help. Midnight Storm was 15 feet away now, close enough that Bolivar could see the scars on his flanks where the veterinarians had tried to treat him, close enough to see the intelligence in his dark eyes and the pain that lived there like a permanent shadow. The thing is, Bolivar said, folding his newspaper and setting it aside, sometimes the only way to heal is to let someone else carry the load for a while. I don't know if horses believe in guardian angels, but I figure we all need someone watching out for us. He stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. The horse tensed, ready to bolt, but something in Bolivar's posture, the way he kept his shoulders relaxed, his hands visible, seemed to calm him. I'm not going to hurt you, Bolivar said. I'm not going to force you to do anything you're not ready for. But if you want to trust me, even just a little bit, I'll be here. For a long moment, man and horse stood facing each other across the morning light. Then, miracle of miracles, Midnight Storm took one more step forward, close enough that Bolivar could have reached out and touched him. Instead, he simply stood there, letting the horse make his own choice. The moment stretched between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm, and Bolivar felt something shift in the air around them. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of trust, the first crack in the wall that trauma had built around the horse's heart. October brought the first frost, and with it, a subtle change in Midnight Storm's behavior. He no longer fled when Bolivar approached, though he still maintained a careful distance. More importantly, he'd begun to show interest in the other horses, particularly old Cornelius, who seemed to understand that the newcomer needed patience. The breakthrough came on a morning when Bolivar arrived to find Midnight Storm lying down in the pasture, his injured leg stretched out awkwardly. The horse's breathing was labored, and his eyes held a glassy quality that spoke of fever. Easy, boy, Bolivar murmured, approaching slowly. For the first time since the auction, the horse didn't try to flee when he came near. Instead, Midnight Storm lifted his head slightly, his gaze meeting Bolivar's with something that looked almost like surrender. Bolivar knelt beside the horse, his weathered hands hovering inches from the injured leg. Let me help you, he whispered, please. The horse's eyes never left his face as Bolivar gently placed his palm against the swollen joint. The heat radiating from the infection was like touching a furnace, and he felt the horse's whole body tense at the contact. But Midnight Storm didn't pull away. Maggie, Bolivar called toward the farmhouse. Call Doc Brewster. Tell him it's urgent. Dr. Quincy Brewster had been the local veterinarian for 30 years, and he'd seen enough injured horses to recognize when one was beyond saving. He arrived within the hour, his face grim as he examined the swollen leg. The infection's gotten into the bone, he said, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Bolivar, but the kindest thing would be to put him down. He's suffering, and it's only going to get worse. No. The word came out harder than Bolivar had intended. There has to be something we can do. Look at him, Doc Brewster said gently. He's burning up with fever. Even if we could clear the infection, the leg will never be sound again. He'll never run, never race. What kind of life is that for a horse like this? Bolivar looked down at Midnight Storm, who was watching the conversation with intelligent eyes. The horse's breathing had become more labored, and his body trembled with the effort of simply staying conscious. But there was something else in his gaze, a plea that went beyond words. He's not ready to give up, Bolivar said firmly. And neither am I. The next 72 hours blurred together in a haze of antibiotics, cold compresses, and sleepless nights. Bolivar moved a cot into the barn and slept beside the horse, waking every 2 hours to check his temperature and administer medication. Magnolia brought him meals and coffee, her earlier skepticism replaced by grudging admiration for her father's dedication. "Why this horse, Dad?" she asked on the second night, as they watched Midnight Storm struggle through another fever spike. "You could have bought 10 healthy horses for what you spent on him." Bolivar was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on the horse's neck. "When your mother was dying, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said that broken things have a beauty all their own, because they show us what's possible when we refuse to give up. This horse, he's not just broken. He's been thrown away, written off, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to care for him. But he's still fighting. And you see yourself in him?" "I see all of us in him," Bolivar replied. "Every person who's ever been told they're not worth saving." On the third morning, Midnight Storm's fever broke. Bolivar woke to find the horse standing on his own, his eyes clear and focused. The swelling in his leg had gone down significantly, and when he took a tentative step, his limp was barely noticeable. "Well, I'll be damned," Doc Brewster said when he arrived for his morning check. "I've never seen anything like it. The infection's completely cleared up, but the real miracle wasn't the healing of the leg, it was the look in Midnight Storm's eyes." As he gazed at Bolivar, where there had once been fear and mistrust, there was now something that looked remarkably like devotion. The horse extended his neck, touching his muzzle to Bolivar's shoulder in a gesture of trust that was more valuable than any trophy. "Hello to you too, boy," Bolivar whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Winter settled over Hutchinson Farm like a familiar blanket, and with it came a transformation that surprised everyone, including Bolivar. Midnight Storm had not only recovered from his infection, but had begun to thrive in ways that defied every expert's prediction. His coat had developed a lustrous sheen that caught the light like black silk, and his movements carried a grace that spoke of hidden strength. More importantly, he'd found his place in the farm's ecosystem. He'd become the unofficial guardian of the other horses, particularly protective of Luna's new foal, a spirited colt named Ranger. When coyotes ventured too close to the pasture, it was Midnight Storm who would charge the fence line, his powerful presence enough to send the predators fleeing. "He's like a different horse," Magnolia observed one snowy morning as they watched him play with the foal. "Remember when he wouldn't let anyone within 50 feet of him?" Bolivar nodded, though his attention was focused on something else: the way Midnight Storm moved. Despite his injury, the horse possessed an athletic ability that took his breath away. When he ran, even with his slight limp, he seemed to float above the ground like a creature born of wind and starlight. The revelation came in February, when a late blizzard trapped them all in the barn for 3 days. To pass the time, Bolivar had been working with Midnight Storm on basic ground manners: leading, standing for grooming, picking up his feet. The horse had proven remarkably intelligent, learning complex commands with just a few repetitions. "Watch this," Bolivar said to Magnolia, who was mucking stalls nearby. He held up his hand in a stop gesture, and Midnight Storm immediately froze. A whistle brought him forward, and a click of the tongue made him back up. "He's got the mind of a scholar trapped in the body of an athlete." "Dad," Magnolia said slowly, "have you ever thought about training him?" "Training him for what?" "I don't know. Maybe not racing, but something. He's too smart and too talented to just be a pasture ornament." The idea took root slowly, like a seed waiting for the right conditions to grow. Bolivar had never considered himself a horse trainer, but he'd grown up around animals and understood their psychology better than most. And Midnight Storm seemed eager to learn, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to challenge his mind as well as his body. They started with simple exercises: walking over poles, navigating obstacles, responding to voice commands. Within weeks, Midnight Storm was performing movements that would have impressed a professional trainer. His injured leg, while still stiff, had strengthened considerably, and his balance was remarkable. Word began to spread through the local horse community. Neighbors would stop by to watch the miracle horse that Bolivar had rescued from certain death. Some came with skepticism, others with curiosity, but all left with a newfound respect for what was possible when patience and compassion replaced force and fear. The real test came in April, when Magnolia suggested they enter the county fair's exhibition competition. It wasn't about winning, it was about proving that Midnight Storm had truly healed, not just physically but emotionally. "Are you sure he's ready?" Bolivar asked. though he could see the excitement in the horses' eyes whenever they practiced their routine. "Look at him, Dad. He's been ready for months. The question is whether you're ready." The night before the fair, Bolivar sat on the porch with Midnight Storm grazing peacefully nearby. The horse had become his constant companion, following him around the farm like a giant dog. There was something almost telepathic about their communication. Now Bolivar could sense the horse's moods, and Midnight Storm seemed to understand his intentions before he spoke them aloud. "Tomorrow's a big day, boy," Bolivar said softly. "Lot of people are going to be watching. Some of them will be hoping we fail, because it makes them feel better about their own limitations. But you know what? We didn't come this far to let other people's doubts stop us." Midnight Storm raised his head from the grass, his ears pricked forward as if he understood every word. In the moonlight, his scars were barely visible, transformed from symbols of trauma into badges of survival. "Your mother always said that the best victories are the ones nobody sees coming." Bolivar continued, "Tomorrow, we're going to show them that broken doesn't mean worthless. We're going to show them that sometimes the most beautiful things in life are the ones that almost didn't make it." The horse took a step closer, his warm breath visible in the cool night air. When he rested his head against Bolivar's shoulder, the gesture carried the weight of perfect trust, a gift more precious than any blue ribbon. The Bourbon County Fair had been a summer tradition for over a century, but nobody could remember a crowd as large as the one that gathered around the exhibition ring on that warm July morning. Word had spread throughout Kentucky about the farmer who'd outbid a millionaire for a worthless horse, and now everyone wanted to see what $60,000 of foolishness looked like. Crestwood Whitmore III sat in the VIP section, his lips curved in a cold smile. He'd driven down from Louisville, specifically to witness what he expected to be a spectacular failure. Beside him sat several prominent horse breeders and trainers, all of whom had declared Midnight Storm a lost cause months earlier. "This should be entertaining," Whitmore murmured to his companion, a sharp-faced woman named Priscilla who wrote for the Kentucky Horse Journal. "That old fool actually thinks he can show a crippled racehorse at a county fair." But when Bolivar led Midnight Storm into the ring, the crowd fell silent. The horse that had been a trembling, broken creature at the auction now moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete. His black coat gleamed like polished obsidian, and his head was held high with quiet dignity. Most remarkably, his slight limp was barely noticeable, transformed from a disability into a distinctive rhythm that somehow enhanced his presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, "please welcome Bolivar Hutchinson and Midnight Storm, performing a demonstration of natural horsemanship and trust-based training." What followed was 15 minutes of pure magic. Bolivar worked with Midnight Storm using only voice commands and subtle body language. No ropes or halters. The horse responded to his every gesture as if they were connected by invisible threads. They moved through a series of exercises that showcased not just the horse's physical recovery, but the depth of trust between them. The climax came when Bolivar asked Midnight Storm to perform a movement called a Liberty Passage, a series of elevated steps that required perfect balance and coordination. It was a movement that would have been challenging for a sound horse, let alone one with a permanent injury. Midnight Storm gathered himself, his powerful haunches coiling like springs. Then he began to move, his hooves barely touching the ground as he floated across the arena in a display of athletic artistry that left the crowd breathless. His injured leg, once a source of shame and pain, now seemed to add a unique beauty to his gait, like a dancer who had learned to make his limitations into strengths. The arena erupted in applause that went on for several minutes. Even the hardened horse professionals in the VIP section were on their feet, their cynicism replaced by wonder. Whitmore's smile had vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like regret. But the real victory came after the formal presentation, when a young girl in a wheelchair approached the ring. Her name was Haven, and she was 8 years old with cerebral palsy. She'd been watching from the sidelines with her family, her eyes wide with fascination. "Can I pet him?" she asked Bolivar, her words slightly slurred but her meaning clear. "Of course you can, sweetheart," Bolivar replied, leading Midnight Storm to the fence. "He'd be honored to meet you." As the little girl reached out to touch the horse's velvet nose, something extraordinary happened. Midnight Storm, who had once been so traumatized by human contact that he'd attack anyone who came near, lowered his head and gently nuzzled her hand. It was as if he recognized a kindred spirit, another soul, who had learned to find strength in places others saw only weakness. "He's beautiful," Haven whispered, her face glowing with joy. "And he's not really broken at all, is he?" "No, sweetheart," Bolivar said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's not broken. He's just different. And sometimes different is the most beautiful thing of all." As the crowd began to disperse, Magnolia approached her father, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I owe you an apology. I thought you were crazy to spend so much money on him. I thought you were letting your emotions cloud your judgment. And now I think you're the smartest man I know. You didn't just save a horse, you saved a piece of everyone who's ever been told they're not worth saving." That evening, as the sun set over Hutchinson Farm, Bolivar sat on his porch with Midnight Storm grazing contentedly nearby. The horse had worn his blue ribbon for exactly 10 minutes before losing interest and wandering off to investigate a butterfly. He was, Bolivar reflected, the only championship horse in Kentucky who cared more about grass than glory. The phone had been ringing all day with offers from trainers, buyers, and even movie producers who wanted to tell their story. But Bolivar had turned them all down. Midnight Storm's value couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. It lay in the trust he'd rebuilt, the hope he'd inspired, and the reminder he'd given everyone that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that happen in the heart. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Midnight Storm wandered over to the porch, his hooves soft on the wooden steps. He rested his great head against Bolivar's shoulder, and in that simple gesture was contained all the love, trust, and gratitude that words could never express. "Good boy," Bolivar whispered, stroking the horse's neck. "You did real good today. But you know what? You were already perfect, right from the start. You just needed someone to believe in you." The horse's gentle breathing was the only sound in the peaceful evening, and Bolivar felt his heart fill with a contentment deeper than any trophy could provide. He'd outbid a millionaire not just for a horse, but for the chance to prove that love and patience could heal even the deepest wounds. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world.